Teasel is one of the tallest and most imposing of our wildflowers. So tall, in fact, that sometimes it tumbles over itself and it has to try to reorient its highly distinctive pagoda-like inflorescences so that they remain vertical. It's a plant of open places like waste ground, building sites and quarries, where it can often persist for years because it grows readily from seed. And at the end of its 2-year life, the rigid stems often stand tall and erect proudly, sometimes for years, which is why they're so popular in floral arrangements. Now, the plant invests a lot of its energy in these spiky, unpalatable stems as a deterrent against herbivores. But they're no deterrent against sap-sucking aphids. Notice the way the lower leaves have no stalks, but fold around the stem, forming pools for rainwater. These leaf moats probably evolved to prevent sap-sucking insects from climbing any further up the stem, and there is some evidence that the plant absorbs nutrients from the insects drowned in them. But in spite of these dead bodies, the water remains fresh, because the basins are lined with thousands of glandular hairs that secrete a slime that coats the dead bodies and prevents them from putrefying. The order in which the flowers develop in the pagoda-like flower heads is very unusual. In most inflorescences, the flowers develop from the bottom up, but here the first flowers to develop are in a belt around the middle, from which the flowers open upwards and downwards, so that later on there will often be 2 distinct belts of flowers. The tubular corolla is a horn-shaped container for nectar, some 12 millimeters deep, so the nectar is only accessible to insects with fairly long tongues, bees, hoverflies, and butterflies. It's not easy to see the corolla because it is so securely enclosed in a tough box-like calyx with spiny edges, each little flower tightly nested into an envelope formed by a V-shaped bract that narrows at the top to a fine, sharp point with spiny edges. These envelopes all dovetailed together in the most beautifully space-economical way. The flowers are protandrous. When the flower first opens, the 4 lilac-coloured anthers project some 5 millimeters beyond the opening of the corolla and shed their pollen. Next day, when the stamens have withered, the style elongates in turn and the receptive stigma projects. Only one branch of what would otherwise be a forked stigma is developed, the reason being that space is so tight. Bumblebees in particular will spend a long time working the flower heads, efficiently harvesting the nectar goblets of their contents, one by one by one. Whereas this hoverfly is busy feeding on the abundant pollen. At the top of the inflorescence, you'll see there's a sort of crown of rigid, spiny bracts. Now, when the seeds are ripening, if these catch on the fur of a passing animal, they act like catapults, scattering the seeds to a considerable distance from the plant. Seed-eating birds, however, are very fond of perching on the inflorescence like little acrobats, and they have no difficulty in accessing the seeds. Goldfinches particularly are exceptionally fond of the seeds. It is these spiny bracts that made the plant useful for combing wool in a bygone age, although that Fuller's Teasel, as it was called, was a distinct variety which has stouter, somewhat recurved spines, whereas in our wild species the spines are straight. Fulling was the process of combing and raising the nap on woolen cloth. I mentioned earlier that aphids are very important sapsuckers on teasel. And teasel is also a great plant to inspect their many predators. Ladybirds, for example, lacewings, the larvae of certain species of hoverflies can often be found in some abundance on teasel. So if you want to see what these not often seen little invertebrates look like, teasel is the place to look.